Control Y. And if ever you need to undo something you just did, remember that one is Control Z. And that works. I think both of these work in Word, PowerPoint, Excel, all of the Office programs. Once we've done that, now what we can do is start working on our balance sheet. Before I start linking, because that's what I'm going to do, is ultimately I'm going to be linking back to the pro forma balance sheet I just created. But before I do that, I need to take a look at the structure of my balance sheet here. I need to make some changes. All right, remember, we touched on it a moment ago. If you look at your pro forma balance sheet, you've got your existing debt in one section, and you've got new debt in another. But on our model tab, we don't have that distinction yet. All right, so the first thing we need to do is set up the rows of our balance sheet in the model tab to match the formatting or the structure in our pro forma balance sheet. We're going to do this by inserting a number of rows. So the first thing I want to do, if you highlight any cell on line 67, and I've just highlighted revolving credit facility in cell A67, or put my cursor there, I want to insert a row, Alt-IR. And what I'm going to do is, just as we had done in our pro forma balance sheet, I want to title that existing debt. And actually, if you go to your pro forma balance sheet, cell A26, you can copy that cell. Save you the time of having to type existing debt and then format it within italics. Copy, Control C to copy. Go back to your model tab, Control V to paste. Existing debt. That's what you should have in cell A67. Or if you want, type it in and italicize it. Italicize using a keyboard shortcut, Control I. Next thing I need to insert some rows for my new debt. Because at the end of the exercise, this needs to look exactly like my pro forma balance sheet. Go down and highlight the row, or put your cursor in any cell in row 71, other liabilities. And I want you to hit Shift, hold down Shift, and use your down arrow key 6 times. We've selected basically 7 rows. And now when we use Alt-IR, we can insert 7 rows at a time. And I know that we need 7 rows because I've done the model many times. So your model now should look like this. You should have a number of blank rows between unsecured debt and other liabilities. If we go back to our pro forma balance sheet tab, we can copy the cell where it says new debt. Control C to copy. Paste that into cell A72 on the model tab. New debt. And actually we can copy these 4 cells from the pro forma balance sheet as well. Cells A32 through A35, the revolving credit facility, term loans, senior bonds, unsecured debt. We can copy this text. Save us the trouble of having to type it. So Control C to copy. Paste those right below the cell where it says new debt. And then you can left indent those, or basically move those to the left. You can use that little icon up here at the top. Or you can use Control Alt Shift Tab. Decrease your indent, Control Alt Shift Tab. All right, that was the goal, to set up this balance sheet so it mimics the formatting and the structure of the pro forma balance sheet. Now that we have that, we can actually link back to it and get the proper values into our pro forma column. That makes sense? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to cash in the pro forma column, and I'm going to start linking. Equals F6 for my pro forma balance sheet tab. And I can start copying, pasting using Alt-ESF. Again, I'm going to calculate the subtotals right here. All the linking back and forth, moving numbers back and forth, it's helpful to calculate the subtotals right in line. Helps you avoid making a mistake. If you link something wrong and then you subtotal it, you'll catch it. You should be able to catch it right away. Same for gross PP&E, net PP&E. Remember, for the subtotal, take the difference. Do not add them. You can also copy the subtotal formulas from column G and paste those into column H using an Alt-ESF, paste special formulas. Whatever's easiest for you. Do that for the liability side and just work your way down the balance sheet. So at this point, you should have your pro forma balance sheet integrated into the model, onto the model tab. The numbers should match what we had on the pro forma balance sheet tab. The balance sheet should balance. And again, starting tomorrow, what I'm going to do is we're going to work straight down top of the income statement all the way through the bottom of the debt schedule. We're going to adjust for everything related to this transaction. All right, so we've got some new amortizable intangibles. Those need to be amortized. All right, we've got some new goodwill. We need to make sure that our balance sheet going forward reflects the new goodwill as well as the old. Different pieces of debt, so we're going to modify our debt schedule. Cash flow needs to key off the pro forma balance sheet, not the historical, and so on. All right, so we're going to make a lot of those adjustments, make changes to the links. At the end of the day, we're going to have, just as we did last week, we're going to have a working financial model, but this one will reflect the increased or the change in the capital structure of the company, and then we'll do the returns analysis. All right, so that'll be tomorrow. Before we get into that, I want to introduce the homework. Because you now have enough information where you can do basically to this point. We've taught you enough so you can create a pro forma balance sheet and drop it into a financial model. Right, but what I want to show you is in the homework, if you go into the homework subfolder, open up your Company B homework shell model, and if you open up, there's another Excel file called Company B instructions. You'll see an instructions page very similar to what we've handed out and what we've used today. This is basically your roadmap for doing this model. A few different assumptions. Overall, the methodology is the same. We're taking an existing financial model, we're modifying it as though we're a private equity fund looking to buy out the company. All right, so if you follow these instructions, you should be fine. The one thing I want to point out is on the pro forma balance sheet tab, it's formatted a little differently than what we've just seen. Okay, not to say what we just did is wrong or it doesn't get done in the real world. There are a couple different ways a pro forma balance sheet can be set up. And this is the homework. Pro forma balance sheet is basically the other way of doing it. All right, and what we're assuming here implicitly is rather than the buyer buying the company and refinancing the debt, we're assuming the seller is going to refinance the debt prior to the transaction. Right, so the seller's going to come in, they're going to take out the debt, they're going to wipe it clean. It's probably going to involve an equity infusion in order to do that. And we're going to buy, as the private equity firm, we're going to buy a quote-unquote clean balance sheet. That is a balance sheet with no debt. All right, so that's really the only difference here, or one of two differences. All right, so here we're going to take the historical balance sheet as we did in our model today. The adjustments by the seller pre-transaction, basically you're going to have, as I just mentioned a moment ago, the seller's going to wipe away the debt, and there's going to be an offsetting equity adjustment, basically an infusion of equity that needs to happen in order to keep the balance sheet in balance. When you add those two columns together, you'll get pro forma before the deal, before the new financing. And then you're just going to create your financing and your transaction adjustments exactly as we did today. We're just going to show them in different columns. All right, so we'll have financing assumptions in one column, we'll have transaction adjustments in the other. These basically will, when you total them up, they will exactly offset one another. And you can see this if you want to even look ahead, look at the solution, you'll see what I mean there. But these will exactly offset each other so that when we add our pro forma before new financing, plus our financing adjustments, plus our transaction adjustments, we'll still have a balance sheet that balances. All right, so that's really all I wanted to talk about with respect to the homework. It's a little different presentation of the pro forma balance sheet. I didn't want people to see it and get freaked out. All right, and if you have any questions, again, we've given you the solution so you can kind of look through it. It's very self-explanatory once you see the solution. So if you've got time tonight, you want to get a jump on the homework, I would basically do your transaction assumptions, your sources, your uses, your pro forma balance sheet. You can drop that into the model just like we did today into this column I. And then I'd stop there. Then tomorrow, after we've shown you how to make all the other adjustments, then you can pick up and finish your own homework model. All right, well, let's talk. We do have a few extra minutes. Let's talk about waterfalls because someone mentioned that to me. Someone always mentions that to me in class, and I like to make sure I kind of explain that to really give people a sense kind of for how private equity works. All right. It's really not part of the class, but it's something that I've seen a lot of. It's kind of the same whether it's private equity or real estate private equity. I've got some examples of some real estate private equity waterfalls if you want to see them. You can get those, I'll email those to you. So just send me a reminder, I'll email those to you and you can see how it works from an Excel standpoint. But basically, what is a waterfall? Can anybody tell me? So a private equity fund is typically set up as a limited partnership. Okay, so if we're Blackstone, let's make the assumption for a moment that we're Blackstone. We're all partners of Blackstone. We raise a fund. We would represent the general partner to the fund. Okay, general partner of, let's say, Blackstone LP. All right, we'd put in 5, maybe 10% of the overall equity. Let's call this $1 billion fund. Maybe we'd put in $100 million of our own money. We should be so lucky, right? We'd put in 5 or 10%. We would raise the remainder of that from limited partners. Pension funds, hedge funds, funds of funds, endowments, high net worth individuals. All right, so actually if this is a $100 million fund, let's say we put in 10, let's say our LPs put in 90 million. Okay, so the LPs put in the majority, we put in a sometimes called sliver equity piece. But we're going to be responsible for the day-to-day management of the fund. We're going to be responsible for identifying deals. We're going to be responsible for managing our portfolio investments. We're going to be responsible as the GP for finding exits. Basically, we're the ones in charge of running these deals, running the fund, and hopefully bringing back a nice return to our limited partners. All right, so that's how a fund is structured. And a waterfall basically dictates at the end of the day, let's say we sell an investment. All right, let's say we go in, we buy this company A that we've been modeling. After 5 years, we sell it. And let's say we have $100 million of cash to distribute. The waterfall dictates how that cash is going to get distributed between us, the GP, and all of our limited partners. Make sense? And a waterfall, let's do a real kind of a plain vanilla waterfall. Another way of thinking of it is priority of payments. All right, so when we get cash in, what happens first? And a lot of times what happens first is we pay a preferred return of some percentage that gets accrued over time on the initial investment or the contributed or committed capital, the invested capital to the deal. All right, so let's say it's a preferred return of 8% per year. Usually this is applicable both to the LPs and the GPs. So we're all earning preferred return of 8% per year on our money. So if we fully invest our $100 million fund, at the end of year one, we should have a capital account balance of $108 million. All right, so the first returns go to satisfy our pref. After the preferred return has been satisfied, usually what happens is initial investment gets returned, return of capital. So that initial $100 million that we've put into the deal or we've invested gets returned. And so say we have, let's say, $200 million at the end of year one. The first $8 million of that goes to paying preferred. The next 100 goes to paying return of capital. And now we've got $92 million left to distribute. Make sense so far? Pretty basic. All right, the third thing that might happen is we might have what we call a look back. Right? We're going to return capital. We're going to pay returns to our LPs. Let's say we're going to distribute cash 90-10, 90% to the LPs, 10% to the GPs, 90% in favor of our LPs until their IRR equals, let's say, 15%. Right, until we get to our hurdle rate, until the LP has achieved an IRR of 150 or 15% on their money, including the pref, but their cumulative returns reflect an IRR of 15%. And then once we get over that, then as the GP, as the general partner in the fund, we start getting what's called carried interest, or carry, or promote, as it's sometimes called. And maybe then it's, I don't know, 75-25 to LPs. So the GP, what happens, GP, remember we put in 10% of the money. Once we get over that 15% hurdle, now we can get 25% of the remaining cash, even though we only put up 10% of the money. Or maybe this goes, maybe it's an aggressive, maybe it's a really generous waterfall where it goes 50-50. We put up 10%, but once we achieve our hurdle, we can start taking 50% after that. All right. So these items that I've circled are what we would call the carried interest. And a waterfall model in Excel basically looks at all of the returns to each class of investor, LPs, GPs, over time, and in each case determines, has this been met? If this has been met, then go on to this. Have each of these been met? If they've been met, then go on to this. Have our returns exceeded 15%? If they have, then go here. A lot of if-then statements. A lot of what we call nested if-then statements, if statement within an if statement, and can be pretty tricky, especially if you get to numerous levels of waterfall. Maybe it's 5 or 6 or 7 different levels. Maybe there are a few different look-backs. Right? The look-back being the measurement of that, have we achieved the 15%? All right, so that's sort of generally, and that's not the common structure, that's just a simple structure of how a private equity fund might be structured. Blackstone may have a more sophisticated structure than that. There can be what's called catch-up provisions, where after, say, return of capital, maybe then the GP gets to catch up. Maybe they'll get a disproportionate amount of the distributable cash until they've caught up in terms of the percentage of overall cash distributions, or into an absolute dollar